All right, you guys ready?
I was born ready.
You're born
Dave still
ready.
likes that. How you did that.
I got to put some more humor into this. Well, hello and welcome once again to the DCL podcast, where we're inviting you to sit back, relax, and we'll be on our way shortly. Well, welcome back to the DCL podcast, and I'm your host, Steve Creasy. As we enter into tonight's show, before we jump in and add our guest on tonight, I'd like to introduce the co-host of the show. How are you doing tonight, Christy?
I am well. This is so past my bedtime, so let's see how we do here.
Yeah, we're keeping you up late tonight. We're switching. Normally we record in the morning, but switching it up on you, and we'll see how you do tonight. See how you keep up with things, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope people's expectations aren't very high.
No, they're high. So you can always find Christy over at packyourpixiedust.com, and thanks for coming back. And to jump into the show tonight, we are, I kind of got intrigued by this kind of topic years ago, kind of a different way to maybe help add value or help kind of save for your vacations. And that is by using miles through either credit card programs, through the airlines, or through frequent flyer programs. And Christy and I were talking about it on one of the shows just recently, and one of our listeners, Joe from Boston, jumped on, and come to find out, he actually has a whole website that is built around it. But before we get into that, I'd like to welcome to the show Joe from Boston. How you doing tonight, Joe?
Hey, Steve. Hey, Christy. Thanks for having me. I'm doing great and just happy to be here.
Okay, can I take a moment, and as you're stealing other people's phraseology in their podcast, but you are from Boston, and we are recording at 9 p.m. Eastern Time?
Yeah?
What? I figured you were a West Coaster and that we needed to record at this ungodly hour because you were, I don't know, working or something. I don't know.
Well, so the reality is, as I'm a bit of a night owl, and I have 3 young kids, and the last one usually nods off around 9 p.m., and that's when I can ensure that there's not going to be a ton of ambient noise, although I can't speak for my dog. So here we are. But yeah, when I was planning with Steve about setting this up, I was like, I can go anytime between 9 and midnight. So sorry, Christy.
Whoa. All right. Well, thanks for coming on and keeping me awake.
Thank you for having me.
I thought this would be a fun topic because after we did that show, you kind of reached out, Joe, and said, hey, if you have any questions about how do you maximize those airline miles or how to maximize those points, let you know, because you have been kind of following this topic. And actually, as we come to find out, you have built a whole website around it. And why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself, how you got into, traveling to Disney, and then we'll get into how you got into the points.
In terms of Disney, I like to joke that it took about 7 years of marriage and 2 kids for me to finally convince my wife to go to Disney, and I'd been spending that much time trying to convince her to go. She wouldn't go without the kids, and I wish I could say that I converted her, but she still tolerates the Disney trips that I make us take as a family. In terms of getting into miles and points, the short version of the story is maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I was at a goodbye party for a friend, and he was kind of bragging about how he had paid for his entire honeymoon with miles and points, and I was pretty skeptical, and I asked all the questions that beginners in the miles and points game ask, and I basically blew him off and was like, this guy's probably just bragging and just trying to make himself sound better than he is. And then 7 years later, I'm the guy who always sounds like I'm bragging. I mean, I don't sound like I'm bragging, but that's probably what people think when I say that I take these trips and save a ton of money using miles and points. And along the way, I'm kind of doing that thing where, I don't do one internet thing well. I just do a bunch mediocrely. So, I first started a website called As the Joe Flies, which is basically about how I travel with my family and how we use miles and points to do that. As time went on, I started a podcast about miles and points called The Observation Deck. And then as more time went on, I was taking more and more Disney trips. And so I started a Disney planning podcast called Disney Decipher. That doesn't really have much to do with miles and points. It's just general Disney planning. And then finally, just last week, or in September, I'm not sure when this is going to release, a couple of friends in the miles and points game and I, who have our Venn diagrams overlapping with miles and points and love for Disney, we started website called milestothemagic.com, and that's where I'll be putting most of our miles and points and how you can use them to save money going to Disney World and Disney cruises and stuff like that going forward. Although there'll still be some on my original site. So like I said, lots of stuff going on the internet. Most of it just mediocre.
No.
Yeah, don't. I've looked at both of your websites, and there's a lot of really good information on it. Now, are you going to continue as the Joe Flies, or are you going to continue to do the podcast as the Joe Flies and Miles to the Magic, or what's kind of your thought going forward?
Yeah, I think like although it's crazy and there's like 4 different things going on, I think my goal is, the podcast only releases. The Miles and Points podcast releases once every 2 weeks, so that's not a ton of time. The Disney podcast is short. We do short episodes, like 15 to 20 minutes, and we would batch record them. And so, to me, Miles to the Magic, it's so niche that that's going to have its own content. And it's not just me. There's 3 of us working together. And so, most of my Miles and Points stuff related to Disney is going to go on that site. But there's still like a lot to talk about like how much of a pain it is to rent car seats or lug car seats to the airport, how annoying it is to have lap infants, even though like I'm too cheap to pay for my kids, how we still love flying around the world to non-Disney places. So that's what As the Joe Flies, the original site, is. There's still going to be a ton of stuff there about family travel, destinations we go to, including but not limited to Disney and stuff like that. So I assume I will be as frequent on As the Joe Flies as I have been in the past, which is, it goes in batches as any hobby does.
And I'll make sure I get all this in the show notes. So for those of you kind of following along, if you want to check out the show notes, there will be links to all of Joe's, to his podcast, and also to the different websites. And
I'm sure everyone's tuned out now that I've given my entire CV for like the last 10 minutes. So
no. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, a Disney Cruise Line. Well, first of all, you said niche. I thought that was kind of interesting because DCL is as niche as you can get as well too. Doing a podcast just on Disney Cruise Line is pretty niche. But let's be honest, a Disney Cruise Line vacation can be very expensive. And I thought that would be a good reason to bring you on, not only to get your websites out there for our listeners so that they can, maybe help save themselves some money in upcoming vacations, but kind of look at the different strategies that people like yourself, and I know Christy's used it in the past, and I've used it in the past to help kind of defer some of the cost of going on some of these vacations, because it's not going to ever get any cheaper, at least not, it hasn't ever done that in recent years. And in full disclosure, Joe and I tried to do this 2 weeks ago, and we got into the weeds deep. So for this show, I thought it would be best and to try and record it and just kind of keep it basic tonight for people that maybe have thought about it, have seen it, but have never really gone down the road of using Miles and Points. So I appreciate you coming on, and let's just have a little bit of fun and talk about some Miles and Points tonight. To start off with, I guess for somebody who goes to the airport, they see that Southwest, sign up for a Southwest credit card or Delta's credit card or something like that. I thought we'd just start off and Joe, if you could go over kind of some of the basic programs that people can get involved with to collect those miles that might fly them down to Disney or elsewhere in the world, or possibly other types of points through different credit cards to get them to the destinations they want to go. Why don't we just start with the basics and some of the programs that are available? Yeah,
so I like to break down, first of all, I have no recollection of what you're talking about, and we didn't record another podcast. So that's crazy. But yeah, Christy wasn't there, so it couldn't have happened.
It didn't happen. It must not have happened.
Exactly. Yeah, but I basically like to break down in my mind mentally the types of Miles and Points, or it's better to call them rewards, credit card rewards that you can earn out there into 3 different types. The first is cashback, which most people are familiar with. You spend a certain amount of money on your card, or you spend $100, you get $2 cash back for each if you have a 2% card. And, cashback, of course, has the benefit of you can budget it to use it for your travel, but you can also use it to pay for your electricity bill if you need to. The second type of reward that I like to earn is what I guess I'll call loyalty points. And the reason why I say loyalty is because, the different programs, like different airlines like Alaska Air, United, Delta, different hotels like Hilton, Hyatt, IHG. Loyalty points are points that are earned in those programs. So like you earn Alaska miles with Alaska, you earn United miles with United. And for the most part, or I'd say 60 to 70% of the times you use those miles, you use those loyalty miles in the loyalty program that they are. So, use United miles for United, use Alaska miles for Alaska. Now, there's definitely exceptions. Like I think you had said you used your Alaska miles to fly on British Airways, or maybe your British Airways to fly. I can't remember exactly how you did it, but you could use your Alaska miles to fly in British Airways, even if that's not what you did for your trip on the Magic, a couple months ago. And so, those loyalty miles, though, are generally just tied to using it within loyalty programs and the rules that they have. And the third type of rewards that you can earn, and my favorite type is what I like to call, or most people call, like flexible points or flexible bank points. And the beauty of those, different credit card companies have different names for them. Like Chase has a program called Ultimate Rewards. American Express has a program called Membership Rewards. But the beauty with those types of rewards is you could transfer them and turn them into loyalty points. So, for example, I can take my Chase Ultimate Rewards and turn them in United miles and use them that way. Or you can redeem them for like cash-like purchases on travel. And, a lot of these flexible bank point programs will give you an extra percentage when you redeem them. So, for example, one of the most popular cards is the Chase Sapphire Preferred. And when you use your points for travel, you get a 25% bonus. And so flexibility is key when you're traveling, especially as your family grows and gets bigger. And so that's why, I tend to try to earn those as much as possible these days. Did I lose you guys? How did I do?
No, good job.
No, that was awesome. Some examples of cashback cards for people that may not know. Costco is a good example of that. I bank with USAA. USAA's credit card gives you cash back as well. So there are a lot of different cashback options out there besides just the airline ones as you started off. And I think you do a really good job on your website, Joe, of making sure you make a very valid point right away before people start actually applying for these credit cards, and that is, do not apply for one unless you can pay it off. Is that right? Or you can probably say it a little bit better than I can.
Yes, though. Can I just butt in and say yes? Please don't put stuff on a credit card to get cash back or loyalty or flexible bank points that you are not going to pay off because the interest rate is horrible.
Yeah, the math is simple. If you're earning 2% cash back on a card, but you're not paying off your balance every month, they're charging you 18% in interest. And, I'm not a mathematician, but 18 greater than 2. It's a lot more complicated than that. But the way it boils down, and yeah, I think it's really important. And the other thing is, you don't want to be messing around with this stuff and kind of ignoring like real life things. You don't want to not pay off your balances, get into debt, hurt your credit, and then all of a sudden you think that you might be purchasing a house or leasing a car. So, it's very important to be fiscally responsible. And, ever since I started doing Miles and Points, or even before I started doing Miles and Points, I always made it a maxim or a mantra or a immutable law that, I could never carry a balance on my credit cards, and that I would pay them off in full every month. And so, we do have debt as a family, whether it's cars or houses, but not credit card debt, because credit cards is where you get killed with interest, and that'll just hurt you in the long run.
My family is the same.
Yeah, definitely. And most of these reward type cards have very high interest rates, so it's definitely a type of card that you don't want to carry a balance on. If you do have to carry a balance, and this is too deep in the weeds to get into, there are better cards that you can get that would have a lower balance. But so these type of cards are definitely not the type of cards that you want to be maintaining a balance on. You want to be able to pay it off as soon and as quickly as you can. So, there's one other card, being Disney Cruise Line fans that we are, that is out there, and that's the Disney credit card. We didn't really talk about that, but why don't we just throw that out there before we start talking about strategies? Could you talk a little bit about that card and what that one has to offer, Joe?
Yeah, so the Chase Disney credit card usually comes with like a $200 statement credit after you spend $1,000 in 3 months. And, I guess we'll get into it later, but a lot of these credit cards, to entice you to sign up, they have sign-up bonuses. And that is something that Miles and Points enthusiasts use to their advantage. And so in the Chase Disney Visa card, you get $200 for spending $1,000. That's pretty good, but I think we can talk later about how, I think you can do better with sign-up bonuses. The Chase Disney card also has some other ancillary benefits, like a meet and greet at Epcot that's free, and more importantly, comes with the PhotoPass picture for free. There's also some other assorted benefits like 10% off on some dining and some restaurants, some merchandise. But the reality is you can also get all of that with the Chase Disney debit card, which you can get for free if you have a Chase checking account, which I do. And so there's no credit check or anything for that like that. So personally, I just use the Chase Disney debit card. I think there's maybe like one or two things you can't get that if you don't have the credit card, but it's nothing that, kind of blew my mind. So, I have a Mickey on my debit card. So, my kids can feel cool when they play with it. And I'm like, hey, that's real money. Give it back. And so it works just as well as the Chase credit card, in my opinion.
Any thoughts on the Chase Disney card there, Christy? Do you use it?
I use it. It also provides you with 6 months same as cash financing on your Disney resort packages, and it has to be a package though, and your Disney Cruise Line booking, so you can still book it even with a travel agent and still get that 6 months. So if you need to pay off something or put something or the larger Disney Cruise Line deposit on your credit card, but you really don't want to pay for that yet, you can do the 6 months same as cash and then just make monthly payments towards it and make sure you paid off by the time the 6 months is up. So I think that is a perk of that credit card. It also provides on the cruise line some discounts as well. I don't know what it is. I think it's 10% off if you spend over $50 at one time at the store. So, and there's some spa discount. And then like Disney Online, the Disney Shop Disney or Disney Store, whatever the online website is, you can get some discounts, small discounts, but discounts using that credit card for those purchases as well. So I have one. It is not my primary card. I put very little on that card, but I keep it in case I ever need to for the same as cash and or for any of the other little perks that sometimes come in handy.
So when you're saying you can use it as cash, you mean it's 0% APR for 6 months
Yes.
when you book a package or a Disney cruise?
Yes.
That's a good benefit, right? Because again, you have to pay off your balance in full, but in this case, you have 6 months and not just 1 month.
Right. So with Disney Cruise Line, you have that big lead time, and they just moved it back even further that you have to have your cruise paid off before the actual cruise. So I'm also of the opinion that you should pay off your vacation before you go on vacation, because I feel like it's pretty depressing to come home and pay a pretty big credit card. So when you can pay it off, but that's still like 3 or 4 months before the cruise that your balance is due. So you can use that same as cash period, no interest rate, to pay it off for those however many months. So that's a good perk.
So that's some different basic card options that are out there, not specific, but just basic card options, airline, hotel, Disney, whatnot. Let's kind of turn and focus on somebody once they get this card, or let's not even talk about that yet. Let's talk about strategies, I guess. What is your strategy as far as being able to maximize miles and points to use the benefits of these cards to help reduce the cost of your next vacation, Joe?
The way to maximize really your miles and points earnings, especially if you're a beginner, is to use, like we talked about, the sign-up bonuses that you get that banks use to entice you to sign up for new credit cards. So I used the Chase card as an example, the Chase Disney card. You get $200 for spending $1,000. Now, for a lot of middle-class American families, it's not out of the realm of possibility that you're spending $1,000 a month on, just your life. And so a lot of these cards will say, if you spend $3,000 in the first 3 months, we'll give you X number of points. So I'll give you an example. There's a card called the Barclays Arrival Plus card right now that if you spend $3,000 in 3 months, they'll give you 50,000 points. That 50,000 points is actually worth $625 for travel. So the majority of my miles and points earning comes from signing up for these credit cards on a fairly regular basis. I've slowed down. There was a time in my life where, I would have 15 new credit cards in a single year, which kind of blows people's minds.
Doesn't that hurt your credit?
So that's the number one question that people ask, like if you're signing up for all these credit cards, doesn't it hurt your credit? Well, what it comes down to and what I've learned from experience. So the reality is, since I started this 5 or 6 years ago, I must have signed up for like 40 or 50 credit cards. And you would think that would like have destroyed my credit. And when I first heard about this, I thought it would. You can believe me, you cannot believe me. But the reality is my credit score when I started 5 or 6 years ago was, in the mid 700s, and now it's in, the high 700s, not like 790s, but it's like 770 or 780 or something like that. I'm so like used to it not hurting my credit that I don't even look anymore. And that's the reality. A quick primer on why that works. Number one, like I said, I'm paying off my balances every month, so I'm never going into debt. Your credit score is basically a picture for the banks to decide whether you are trustworthy to extend credit to, because they don't want to lend you $10,000 and then you go bankrupt and then they're just out $10,000. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So when you sign up for new credit cards, what happens is the overall credit line that you have in your life just increases. But if you're being wise and fiscally responsible and not spending more than you used to spend, all of a sudden, let's say I spend $1,000 a month and I have 2 credit cards and total I have a $10,000 line of credit to me. Then banks look at me and they're like, well, that guy spends 10% of the available credit to him.
Right.
But then if I have 5 cards that have $50,000 of credit, all of a sudden I'm still only spending $1,000. All of a sudden this guy spends only 2% of the credit allotted to him. And that is what helps your credit score to grow over time. So your credit score does get dinged when you first apply, because if you think about it like a bank, if someone keeps applying for credit, wow, they're probably not credit worthy. But then as you keep those accounts and your overall credit line increases, then all of a sudden you look more credit worthy to the banks. And that's why your credit score goes up. And that's why, I've stopped worrying about that, because of that simple reason. Like I don't spend any more money than I used to, or I try my best not to. And, I have, way too much credit, way more than I would ever, I couldn't even think of how to use it. Maybe when the kids go to college, all of a sudden my entire scheme will come crashing down. It's not a scheme though. It's something that a lot of people do.
Or we can charge college. Can we charge college? And then we could pull it out, right? And then maybe that we could do that. And then you can use more of your available credit.
Yeah,
But
see,
not-
colleges got wise. You can charge your college, but they'll charge you like a 3 to 5% fee.
Oh.
So you end up like losing money. Same with, it's if you can find a car dealer that'll let you put the entire car on
Right.
your credit card, that means that car dealer is not selling cars very well that month.
I can put the down payment on.
Right. Yeah, they'll let you do the down payment. So you usually get like $3,000. Oh, that's another thing, right? Like, if you're in the market for like a big purchase, it's great to sign up for a new credit card. And then, if I'm making a down payment on a car of $3,000, all of a sudden I've cleared that. The language that's used is clearing the credit card sign up bonus. I've cleared that already. And so all of a sudden I have my $625 in rewards. So kind of over time, as you build this up, you're just earning more and more miles and points, and you can use that to really save money on your vacation. And again, the key is being fiscally responsible, not spending more than you would have spent otherwise. And so, if your family does $1,000 a month, you can get 4 new credit cards a year. And depending on the sign up bonus, that could be worth up to, in some cases, $2,000 worth of travel just for your regular spending.
Okay, so I get that. And to kind of summarize a little bit, each credit card generally offers, the new person signing up for that credit card is generally going to entice you with some type of reward, whether that's miles, whether that's points, whether that's cash back, whatnot. $200 with if you sign up for a Disney's Chase card. Once you get that original, or once you get those original points, what is your strategy afterwards? In other words, I guess, we kind of talked about this on the last show, where there's a time limit where you could reapply for that same type of card to get those, because that's where you're going to get the biggest chunk of miles for most of us, unless you have a home-based business where, like, we've got some friends that own a contracting business, and they just put all of their entire business goes on their Alaska Visa card that they have, and so they've got just a gazillion miles. So whenever we go anywhere,
that's what we call the dream.
Yeah,
when someone reimburses you for your credit card spend.
Right, but a lot of us aren't in that. A lot of us don't have that opportunity. We're working for the man, for whoever that is, and so or the woman, whoever that happens to be, and so we don't have that ability to do that. To funnel our business onto that credit card. So we're just. What is your strategy, I guess, after that initial bump? Is it to redo the card again eventually, or do you put all of your household expenses on it? What type of strategies do you use, Joe?
Yeah, so I think that's the beauty of this. So on my new site, we all did bios, and most of the stuff that we talked about was Disney related, like favorite park, Epcot for me, favorite place to eat, et cetera, et cetera. But we had one thing that said favorite miles and points credit card to use. And my answer was the credit card that I'm currently working on a sign-up bonus for. And the reality is, I would say from when I started, it took maybe 3 to 4 years before I ran out of new credit cards and bonuses to look for. But actually in the last year or two, there have been all these new products coming up. And so kind of over time, there's always going to be a new credit card to sign up for. And the key is, if you understand how these programs work well enough, then you can basically determine, okay, I'm going to sign up for this credit card in Q1, quarter one of the year, this credit card in quarter two, this credit card in quarter three. I'll give you an example. Alaska, which you're pretty familiar with, they had a nice credit card sign up bonus. And so over the course of like 2 to 3 years, I signed myself and my wife up for their credit cards. And then over time, we had enough miles to kind of book tickets for our family to go to Asia. I ended up using them for something else, but that was the original plan. So, I kind of plan out what I'm going to use the miles for. And then, I just keep signing up for credit card sign up bonuses. You kind of don't run out. And that's why this game can be dangerous if you're not responsible, because it becomes like a little bit of an addiction. Like I get an adrenaline rush when I get a new credit card in the mail, because I know that that's like going to lead to like some travel in the future. But if you don't know where you're going to use your points, then that's kind of wasted. That's why I recommend flexible bank points, because there's so many options and you should be able to find a way to use them no matter what, and even if you're a beginner.
Well, that's a perfect segue. This is a very difficult subject, and for all our listeners out there, if you're still following along, which I hope you are, you're gonna have to do your research on this. You have to do the research on what would work best for you, what's your strategy, what do you want to accomplish, and so I think that's a good segue. We'll kind of leave that there as far as the different strategies. It's going to be a continual education process, and I think your website's a perfect one to go to, Joe. There's several other ones out there to get people started, but once you do have those miles or points or whatever else, could you talk a little bit about how you use them? So, and each one's going to be a little bit different. We could start with the basics of like how you would use an airline one, how would you use a hotel, and then kind of go into the flexible banked ones. Does that make sense?
So for airline, for example, the easiest thing for me to do is to just go through my travel for 2019. So I have a ton of Delta miles on the back of 2 to 3 credit cards over the last 2 to 3 years. I want to take my daughter to the Women's World Cup in France next June. I was looking around. I saw Delta had seats in economy across the pond, in June for the dates that I liked. They cost 46,000 miles round trip for each of us, times 2, 92,000 miles. I paid that plus about $20 in taxes and fees. And so my daughter and I are going to go to France and probably Disneyland Paris, although didn't tell my wife about that yet. So good thing she never listens to anything that I record. So that's airline miles. And I'm pretty sure that's how you ended up going to Europe, right, Steve?
Yeah, that's it exactly. And without, once again, getting too deep in the weeds, when Joe says that as far as the airlines, and just trying to keep it somewhat basic, you can go to each one of the airlines' websites. Whoever you have your miles with, Delta, you'd go to delta.com and then log into your account, and you could say, book this using dollars, book this using points, book this using dollars and points. So it's pretty flexible. You can look at, several different options of how you want to do it. The caveat too is like a lot of the airlines have alliances that they have with other airlines. So a case in point, Alaska has British. So we use British Airways. British is are one of our main options to get to Europe, since Alaska doesn't fly to Europe. So we take our miles from Alaska that we've earned, and then we go to Alaska's website and use the miles, and then we booked it on British. But and here's a caveat too. British is infamous, especially going through Heathrow. They're going to charge you a huge fee. So what you think may be free by using miles quickly adds up with the excise taxes that they put on even the mileage ticket. So that's just another example of where you might want to look around and really have your strategy before you start this process as to what you want to use. And it's not easy to figure this out. Sometimes you just get burned and you move on. But that's another aspect of it too. So yeah, that's how we got over. We used British and used our Alaska miles to get over there.
As an aside, if you are planning travel to Europe, tickets have been like a lot cheaper in the last year or two than they have been in the past, cash-wise at least. So it's always worth kind of comparing prices, even if you're not flying British Airways, which, yes, is notoriously bad for what they call as airline fuel surcharges. Hotel example, really quickly. One time, my family and I were stranded because of weather in Boston, I think. We were trying to fly back from Orlando, pulled up Hilton's website. They had a room at their Disney Springs DoubleTree for like 40,000 points or 50,000 points. I can't remember. Booked that and then didn't have to worry about my hotel for that night. In terms of flexible bank points, great example is this actually cruise I took this past August. So Citi has a program called Thank You Points, and they have a cruises and tourist desk. And you can book your Disney cruise through them just the same way you could book it through Christie and Pack Pixie Dust. Little plug there for you, Christy.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Although you're taking my business away by giving it to
I know.
me
I'm sorry. The difference with Citi, if I was paying in cash, then, I definitely look at going through someone like Christy. However, the difference is Citi has these flexible bank points called Citi Thank You Points, which I'd earned a bunch of. And when I booked through the Citi's Cruises and Tourist desk, I could use my Citi Thank You Points to pay my deposit, and I paid a little extra for my cruise so that I didn't even have to, you don't have to pay that off because you've already earned those points. The super nice thing was I had a credit card at the time called the Citi Thank You Premier, which gave you a 25% bonus. So, if most points are worth 1 cent per point, when I had the Citi Thank You Premier, when I was booking this Disney cruise, it was worth 1.25 cents per point. So I could have cashed that in for cash for $1,000, but instead or if I had 100,000 points, I could cash it in for $1,000, but instead I cashed it in for $1,250 applied towards my Disney cruise. And so that's why I went through them and not you, Christy. I apologize.
I forgive you.
Thank you. So yeah, that's an example of using loyalty miles. That's an example of using flexible bank points. And then of course, cash back. Usually you just redeem it as a statement credit on your credit card bill. That's usually pretty straightforward, and people are usually pretty used to doing that.
So we've talked a little bit about the different types of points that are available. We talked about a strategy. We talked about how to use them. Let's just use a basic example, Joe, of somebody who wants to do this, who wants to kind of think about doing this. How would they plan a trip to Disney using the different point types that are available to them?
What I would recommend for a beginner is the card that I talked about before, which is called the Barclays Arrival Plus card. Like I said, you spend $3,000 in 3 months, or it might be $4,000 now, but you get 50,000 points. And basically what happens is, let's say you book your plane tickets using that card, you can use those points to zap away $625 of that purchase price. So, if I bought $800 worth of plane tickets, I use the 50,000 points I got, subtract $625 off of that. I only owe $175 when I'm paying off my balance in full at the end of the month. So if you know that you are going to Disney World or on a Disney cruise, say a year from now, you could sign up one for yourself, get the spending done in 3 months. You have a $625 there, and then sign up for one for your partner in the next 3 months, and then you have another $625 there. If you want to add on to that, you can also get that Citi Thank You Premier card that I spoke about, and that is currently, I can't remember how much you have to spend, but it's a 60,000 point sign up bonus right now. And like I said, you can use that to get 1.25 cents per point. And the nice thing is you can actually use those to pay for Disney tickets. So you don't only have to use it to pay for Disney cruise, you could use them to pay for Disney tickets. So 60,000 points at 1.25 cents per point. That's going to be worth $750 towards your Disney ticket. And the trick with that is when you go through Citi's Cruises and Tours department. It's weird, but if you go to their Cruises and Tours department and you tell them you want to pay for Disney tickets with your thank you points, you can do that. So let's say you have a year of planning time. You just get these 4 cards, and you're just kind of zapping away costs from your trip. So whether that's Disney Cruise Line or whether that's Disney itself, you can just save a lot of money that you wouldn't have spent. So that's how I recommend beginners start out. It's just kind of like the easiest thing to do and kind of the most straightforward. Although, I don't know, maybe you guys did not find that straightforward.
No, it is.
That's perfect. So I guess to kind of summarize this a little bit, and I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here too, Joe. What websites would you recommend, besides yours, obviously, to go to for people that, this is totally confusing to them, but they see the value in it, they want to learn more? Where would you point them to start?
It's funny because I don't. So the main sites that people start with are the Points Guy. There's a site called Million Mile Secrets. I think those are the two main. Those are kind of the two sites that no matter what anyone says, if they're in the miles and points game, they started by reading those sites. The tough thing about those sites these days are they spit out so much information that I actually think it's tough for beginners. And since I'm not a beginner myself, I haven't checked out their starting content in years. I will recommend there's a guy, he's a little more advanced, but he does have a decent beginner's guide. Actually, let me just double check. Yeah, so there's a guy in the space that I really like. Most of his stuff is more advanced, but he does have a pretty straightforward start here beginner's page, and that's called the Frequent Miler. So if you just Google Frequent Miler, you can find him. Our goal for Miles to the Magic is to make it as simple as possible. You know, we kind of are looking to, well, there's two target audiences for us. There's people who love going to Disney World, but just want to save more money doing so, and we want to be able to offer them a different way to save that money, and that's through the power of miles and points. And then there's the segment of crazy people like us who are already super into miles and points, but their partner or children are trying to force them to go to Disney World, and they just want to figure out what the best way is to use their miles and points to save on their Disney World travel. So, you know, our goal is to have beginner's guides specifically geared towards Disney. And so, you know, that's what we hope to do. And there are people out there, you know, who run the gift card game for Disney, like trying to get Disney gift cards as discounted as possible and things like that. So we'll have some stuff on that. But what we found is Disney fans like ourselves, I mean, we're fanatics, you know, I don't know, maybe it's an addiction. All right. But we're really into going to Disney. The amount of time that we spend using energy to like make our touring plans, make our dining reservations, decide our fast passes. You know, if you're going on the cruise line, you kind of figure out like where you're going to eat, when you're going to go to Palo or Remy, like all that stuff. Like that takes a large degree of organization in your mind, as I assume you two can attest when you're planning your Disney vacations.
Oh, definitely.
Yes. Yep.
And so, you know, it's the same kind of part of your brain that needs to organize things that can help you to earn miles and points to save money on that Disney vacation. You know, like I said, especially if you know you're planning a Disney vacation, you're going to have to spend money, cash on tickets. If you're going on DCL, you're dropping thousands of dollars. Why not earn miles and points from a new credit card and get sign-up bonuses for that to offset some of that money that you're going to spend? And so that's kind of our general idea. All of us who are Disney fans, you know, we have figured out the organizational structure of Disney to kind of get the most value we can out of our trips. And what I'm hoping is that we can help people figure out how to get even more value, but using those same organizational skills, but in a different area. And in this case, it's credit card, miles and points, and the power of they can have to help you save on your Disney vacation.
I'm shaking my head again.
It's an audio podcast.
I'm leaving that part in.
Yeah, leave that in, Steve.
Definitely. All right. So once again, just to kind of summarize a little bit, most importantly, do not carry a balance. Do not get yourself into credit card debt with
100%.
With this type of program. Educate yourself and don't feel like you have to start in and be a PhD level like Joe is. You know, it can be as easy as just signing up for that Southwest card on your way down on your next DCL cruise or Disney World, Disneyland vacation, or wherever you're going, and just starting something simple like that. So maybe deferring the cost of flying down there the next time you guys go down there. But if this appeals to you and you want to learn more, then obviously definitely go to some of the sites that Joe's recommended. You can start off with the Points Guy, the Frequent Miler, and obviously also go check out Joe's site, As the Joe Flies and Miles to the Magic. They're both excellent sites, and I can't wait to see where you kind of go with Miles to the Magic, Joe. It's a great start, and it just went live just recently, right?
Yeah, that's right. Chase had some bad news on the Disney front, and so, you know, we decided to go live a little bit earlier than we were prepared for. I should name my co-conspirator. So Bob Dwyer, he writes for a Miles and Points site called Milenomics, which is a great site, but that is Milenomics. He's kind of like the professor. Bob isn't, but I guess he's the TA for the professor. So that's like really high level stuff. And then Rachel Berkey, who moderates Facebook group about this stuff called Award Travel 101. That's another great place to go for beginners. It is a bit like drinking from a fire hose, but you can ask beginner level questions there, and they're really good at trying to help you out. So Award Travel 101 is the Facebook group. I should note one more thing. So most of these rewards credit cards have annual fees, and again, to entice you, like the Barclay Arrivals card that I was talking about, they'll waive the annual fee for the first year. Some people get stressed out, and I really did not like this aspect of the game. What you end up doing is, like, after you have the card for a year, unless you love the card, you generally cancel it, so you don't pay that annual fee. So that card has a $95 annual fee. Like, when I got it, I had it for a year, and then I actually kept it for the second year, but then on the third year, I canceled it. For Disney fans who think that they might not want to cancel credit cards to avoid annual fees, just ask yourself this. How often do you cancel your dining reservations to book other ones that are better? It's the same exact concept, except for their credit cards, as long as you're paying off your balance, of course.
Good point there. There's something about, I don't know if it's because it's a bank or if it's a credit card or whatever else, it does feel like it's more important, so harder to cancel than, that dining reservation at Be Your Guest, right?
It is, but some of them you can even do online now. And given how terrible the Disney website is, and I hear, Christy, the travel agent side is even worse. Is that true?
It's broken every Tuesday. Actually broken every Tuesday. And yes, it is horrible.
Yeah, so given how bad the Disney website is, usually I'm calling in. Like, I don't like talking to humans, and some credit cards you can actually just cancel online with a secure message. I love those. Those are the best. Even like if you're a Disney fan, you end up having to call in to cancel these dining reservations anyway because the website's so broken. So it's the same exact idea. And the difference is, though, sometimes when you call to cancel a credit card, they'll be like, hey, if you spend $1,000 in the next 3 months, we'll give you an extra 20,000 points. It's called a retention bonus. They want to keep your business.
Like the cable companies used to do.
Exactly. Actually, they still do that.
Not here.
I got a good deal on. You gotta really commit to canceling.
Yeah, it has. The new company has to be in your house, and then they'll offer you a deal. Yeah.
That's so funny because I was thinking the exact same thing. About every 3 years, I have to call Comcast up and renegotiate and get the price back down. So,
right.
Yeah, I got a really good deal the last time I did that. But anyway, I digress. When you call Disney to cancel your dining reservation, they're never going to be like, "Oh, you can't go to Be Our Guest anymore. Here's a reservation to Cinderella's Royal Table if you give us an extra $100." So
true.
You have
a
lot of us who are Disney fans, we have these skills already, and we're just applying them to a different sector of our lives.
So I guess in summary again, don't carry a balance. Educate yourself through the different websites we've talked about. Develop your strategy, and then implement it. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, and earn the miles for the trips that you want to take. So, there's not, if you think right now what's easiest for you is just getting the $200 on the Chase Disney card, then just do that. Do whatever is easy for you. You just I just Elmer Fudded that. But you just slowly work your way, and like any skill, like the first time we went to Disney, right? Like the first time I went to Disney as an adult, I wrote a series on my website called Daring to Disney because it was just so intimidating going as an adult and all the crazy things that you have to learn. But since we learned all that, we can learn all this stuff about miles and points as well.
I like how in your summary, you basically unshamed us if we are using credit cards like the Disney credit card just because it's easier, or the Delta credit card. Because when you listen to some other miles podcasts, they are like, the Delta and the Disney, those are pretty much the worst credit cards to get because the point value is so low. But if they're getting used and there's other bonuses associated with it, then there are some advantages. It's just maybe not the same as Ultimate Rewards.
Yeah, I mean, when I was starting out, I was probably more like that. But what I've realized is that everyone's situation is so different. Like Steve is out in Portland. Yourself and me.
Horror.
Yourself and me. I love Portland. Both Portlands.
I do.
But the reality is, like, it doesn't make sense for us to use Alaska Miles ever. Right. Because Alaska doesn't fly to where we live.
And Steve knows there's one flight right in and out of Detroit, and it's at the worst times ever.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to really want to see Steve in person to use his Alaska Miles. So the reality is, like, we can't, and then, I mean, we're all parents, so, you can't judge someone for what their situation is. So it's the same in the credit card world, miles and points world, right? Like some miles and points are just going to make more sense for some families than they are for others. And it's not a big deal. But don't read my earlier stuff because I was probably a jerk back then.
Good to know. People should, though, read your current site, the Miles to Magic, and they should see the cutest, funniest picture with the little sad face over the picture where you're announcing Chase's Disney relationship.
Yeah. Just say that MS Paint is your friend.
I love it.
Well, as we close up here, Joe, thank you so much for coming on, and we're gonna have Joe back on. He and his family went on a 4-night Disney dream, and you have toddler or baby with you, so I'm pretty excited to hear about that. Both, yeah, toddlers and a baby. So we're going to have Joe back on and talk about his dream cruise. But between now and then, Joe, if people have questions, is there a way through your website, and I forgot to look at this ahead of time, for them to get a hold of you, or how would they ask you questions? Is that okay for me to ask that, and I'll take it off if you don't want me to?
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm always happy to answer questions and help people out. I did forget that we're on the Disney Cruise Line podcast, so I apologize to all your listeners. That is the name of the podcast, right? We barely talked about cruises. So thank you for indulging us. The easiest way to contact me is to email me asthejoeflies@gmail.com. Our new site also has a email address, milesToTheMagic@gmail.com, but I think people who own multiple Gmails know that, it usually takes a while for the new ones to get up and spinning. You can also contact me on Twitter @asthejoeflies. And so we should have a contact page on the site eventually, but in the meantime, the easiest way to find me is to find me on Twitter like I found Steve, or to email me again asthejoeflies@gmail.com. Basically, As the Joe Flies everywhere on social media you can find me.
Well, thanks again, Joe, for coming on. We really appreciate your time today and making a complicated topic, bringing it down to some
more complicated.
Yeah, more complicated. No, seriously, in all seriousness, as we kind of talked about at the beginning, Disney vacations are expensive. And if there's a strategy out there that you can incorporate to help you pay for those vacations so that you can continue to go on them, or to take that once-in-a-lifetime vacation, whatever strategy that's out there that you can use, I think our listeners would love to hear. And I think you brought a lot of value tonight for our listeners who want to get on this road of maximizing their points to help defer a little bit of that cost. So I really appreciate you doing that tonight.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah, you said that perfectly, and just thanks again for having me. And I will say to your listeners, if you thought that this was confusing and convoluted and, I rambled on too much, you should have heard the last episode that we recorded.
Yeah, because we didn't have Christy with us to provide a little adult direction. So anyways, well, thanks again, Joe. We appreciate you coming on, and I look forward to talking to you and bring you back to talk about your family's trip on the Dream. Have a great night.
Thanks so much. You too.
Well, that's going to wrap up our show today. Once again, I really want to thank Joe for coming on and sharing his knowledge on miles and points and helping us kind of navigate that whole process to possibly saving on your next Disney vacation. And he is a busy guy. If you want to hear more from Joe, you can find him over at Saverocity Observation Deck Podcast. And he also has another podcast he's on, Disney Deciphered. He also has several different websites as well. All of this is going to be in the show notes, so you can go there and find links to them. But you can find them also at milestothemagic.com. That's their latest website, which has a lot of different articles on using miles and points to save on your next Disney vacation. Also, he's at milestothemagic.com, asthejoeflies.com, and disneydeciphered.com. And once again, if you've been enjoying our podcast and you know somebody else who would enjoy it, we sure would appreciate it if you would pass it on. That helps us get the word out in the podcasting community and Disney and the cruising community about our show, and helps us grow it. Also, if you'd like to go over to iTunes and leave us a review, we sure would appreciate that as well. Between now and the next show, if you are heading out on your next vacation, all of us here at the DCL Podcast would like to wish you fair winds and safe travels as you head out on your next adventure. Once again, thanks for coming back and taking a listen, and we'll see you next time on the DCL Podcast.